The door of the pizza delivery car opened slowly, and a huge man got out of the car. The man seemed to be almost 7 feet tall and must have weighed close to 300 pounds. His shadow blocked out the light of the sun. All three boys stared at the man as he walked over to their crumpled bicycles. He looked at the dent in his car door, looked at the boys, and then said,
"Oh well, it's an old car anyway. You boys sure are in a hurry. Where are you headed?"
The boys were relieved to find out the huge man was not angry with them, and so before they knew it, they had told him the entire story.
"Do you mean to tell me that you are going to see Pastor Sullivan at the hospital?" "I'm Big Tom and I work with the youth group at Pastor Sullivan's church. How about if I give you a ride to the hospital?"
The boys looked at the dented car and then at each other. Would it be safe to ride in this car? But they never had a chance to respond. Big Tom picked up all three of the boys and placed them in the back seat of his car.
Ugh.
They were soon zipping down the street toward the hospital. When they finally arrived, the boys and Tom went over to the information desk.
"Could you tell us which room Pastor Sullivan is in?"
The nurse looked at the computer screen for a moment and then replied,
"You will find Pastor Sullivan in room 205.
"Finally! Now we'll be able to find out what Pastor Sullivan was going to tell us at Jim's house."
Yeah!
The boys were so excited. They all crowded into the elevator and headed for the second floor. When the doors opened, Jim, Ed, and Ben almost knocked over a nurse pushing a wheelchair.
Hey, slow down, boys.
Oh, sorry, lady.
Finally, at the end of the hallway, they found room 205. Yooper Jim took the lead and knocked on the door. They were surprised to hear a lady's voice.
Come in.
As the boys opened the door, they were surprised to see a lady dressed in white clothing changing the sheets on a bed.
"Excuse me, ma'am."
Yes, boys, how can I help you?
We're here to visit Pastor Sullivan.
Oh, I'm so sorry. He just left 15 minutes ago.
15 minutes ago? How disappointing. Will the boys ever find Pastor Sullivan? Will they ever learn his secret? The boys were obviously disappointed, but they decided to keep on looking for him. Tom turned to the boys and said,
"I'm afraid I can't drive you over to Pastor Sullivan's house right now. I have to deliver some more pizzas, but I can drop you off at Pizza Hut."
The boys agreed to ride back with Big Tom to Pizza Hut. When they finally arrived, Big Tom suggested that they wait in the car while he got the pizzas.
"I might be able to drive you to Pastor Sullivan's house on the way to my next delivery."
So the boys decided to wait as Big Tom left the car and entered Pizza Hut. But it seemed as if Big Tom would never come out. Ben suggested that they walk to Pastor Sullivan's house by themselves, but they decided to wait for a few more minutes. What was Big Tom doing?
Hey, I can go inside and see what's going on.
No way, Ed. You'd stay and eat a couple of pizzas and we never make it to Pastor Sullivan's. Let's just go.
So the boys opened the creaky door of the car and began the long walk to Iron Mountain. The boys had traveled about a mile when Ben said something that made them all stop.
"Do we even know where Pastor Sullivan lives?"
They all stopped and stared at each other.
No, we don't. Now how are we gonna find him?
The boys sat down next to the sidewalk and stared at the ground. Then Jim had a brilliant idea. He pulled out the pink piece of paper.
Hey, look at this. The church's address is on it. Let's go there.
Yippee! Let's get going!
Since they were in early elementary, the boys had known all the shortcuts in the area. So they decided to cut down a street that went past the cemetery. As they walked, they couldn't help but notice that the sun was getting lower in the sky. It was starting to get dark, and they were right near the cemetery. Big Ed was the first to make mention of it.
Guys, we'd really save some time if we cut through the cemetery. What do you think?
It was difficult to understand Ed as he was munching on a bag of Doritos he had taken from his coat pocket. He was always eating. But the boys looked at the cemetery. The lowering sun cast eerie shadows over the gravestones.
I don't know. It's pretty dark in there.
Oh, come on. There's nobody in there.
So the boys carefully crossed the cemetery.
Hey, what was that?
What was that?
I saw something moving in the shadows over there.
Oh, come on, Ed. It's just your imagination.
The boys began walking quickly through the cemetery. Their hearts began beating a little bit faster. Then it happened.
Hey, who goes there?
Ah!
The boys screamed as they ran as fast as they could back toward the road. They ran and ran until they could hardly run anymore. They ran for nearly a mile before finally stopping.
Phew. We finally made it.
Yeah, am I ever glad to be out of there.
Wait. I don't see Big Ed anywhere.
The boys looked around and it was true. Big Ed was no longer with them. Where could he be? Had the man in the graveyard kidnapped their friend? There was only one thing to do. The boys ran down the street looking for a building with a phone. But it seemed as if the entire neighborhood was deserted. Now that the sun had gone down, you would think that people would have turned their lights on, but none of the houses had any lights on until they came to the end of the road.
Hey, look!
Jim pointed at a building near the corner of the street. They could see a light shining through the basement window. Only a field separated them from the building. Would they be able to find someone there? Or was the light left on by accident?
There's only one way to find out. Well, let's go knock on the door.
The boys hurried across the small field to the back door of the building. They could tell that the building was well kept. A small white car was parked in the gravel parking lot on the opposite side of the building. When they arrived at the back of the building, Ben timidly knocked on the door.
Hey, come on, you've got to knock louder than that. Here, let me try.
Ben stepped aside for Jim to knock on the door, but just as Jim was about to knock on it, they heard the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. The sound became louder, and then the door slowly opened. A tall man with a black baseball cap opened the door. It was Pastor Sullivan.
Hey boys, what are you doing here?
Jim and Ben just stared at Pastor Sullivan. Their eyes were opened wide and their mouths hung open. They were so surprised.
Are you boys all right?
Yes. It's just that we've been looking for you all afternoon and we weren't expecting to find you here. And when we got to the hospital, you had just left. And then when we went to the cemetery, someone said, "Who goes there?" So we ran away. But Big Ed didn't make it, and so we've been looking for a house with a light on it so we could call the police. And when we knocked on the door, you answered, and we were so surprised that we got to think of anything to say.
Well, it sounds like you've had quite an adventure. Would you like to use the phone here?
The boys were soon in the basement calling the police and Big Ed's mother. But nobody had heard from him since the boys had left that afternoon. This was very strange.
I tell you what, how about if I take you to the cemetery and we'll all look for Big Ed together?
When they got there, it was very dark. Pastor Sullivan drove the car through the cemetery with the bright headlights on, but there was no sign of Ed.
I just don't understand. I thought he was right behind us.
Boys, why don't we ask the Lord Jesus to help us find your friend?
Jim and Ben looked at each other.
Well, okay, if you think it will help.
The boys and Pastor Sullivan took off their hats, and Pastor Sullivan began to pray. The boys couldn't help staring at Pastor Sullivan. It seemed as if he was actually talking to someone. But when they looked at his face, his eyes were closed. When Pastor Sullivan had finished asking the Lord for help, Yooper Jim suddenly slapped himself in the head.
I bet I know where he is. Why didn't I think of that earlier?
Where is he?
Where was Big Ed? Does Yooper Jim really know where Ed is?